Circe. We sailed in silence over the desolate sea. It seemed that our journey had been doomed from the start, and now great Poseidon himself was against us. We had every reason to be subdued. After 2 days we came to an extraordinary floating island surrounded by a bronze wall, encasing tall cliffs that rose up sheer above it. We moored our ships in the harbor, and with the trepidation after our previous encounters, climbed the stone steps that led to the city. We should not have worried. The island belonged to Aeolus, a favorite of the gods, chosen by Zeus to be the guardian of the four winds. He treated us to a splendid feast, and when I had told him the story of Troy and our checkered journey home, he presented me with the perfect gift. It was a bag of strong hide tied with a silver cord that contained 3 of the 4 winds. Only the west wind was left free, and the west wind would blow us home. When we were safely on the shores of Ithaca, I was to release the other winds, but, as Aeolus stressed how important this was, not a moment before. I blame myself for the disaster that overtook us. For 9 days and nights the west winds blew us towards Ithaca. On the morning of the 10th day, we could see our own countrymen tending to their flocks on the hills and the smoke of 100 fires curling over the island. Sure that our voyage had come to an end, I relaxed into a deep sleep. I had been at the rudder for 9 days and nights without closing my eyes once, determined that nothing should go wrong. If only my vigilance had lasted a little longer. As soon as I was asleep, my men began to talk among themselves. I suppose they were carried away by the sight of Ithaca, drunk with the anticipation of the joys of coming home. Greedy, pig-headed fools. They were never to know those joys. They decided to empty the bag Aeolus had given me and share the contents equally between them. They got equal shares all right. We all did. Once the winds were loose, they all blew up a tempest that drove us away from the Ithacan shores. I woke to find us lost in an open sea. My men were weeping for their folly. As for myself, I felt like hurling myself into the raging sea to end it all then and there. Within 3 days the winds had driven us back to Aeolus' floating island. I explained what had happened and begged him to help us again. But now Aeolus would have nothing to do with us. Get out of here at once, unluckiest of men. Your story shows that the gods are against you, and the God-forsaken are not welcome here. We returned to our ships with his cold words ringing in our ears, and sick at heart we sailed away from the island. The winds were unpredictable, and the swollen sea made it difficult to row. We were lost yet again, and now there was no west wind to blow us home. For 6 days and 6 nights we struggled miserably on, and on the 7th morning we were once more in sight of land. We sailed along the coast until we came to a city with a well-protected harbor overlooked by tall cliffs. I watched the rest of the fleet pass through the narrow harbor entrance and drop their anchors in the still, sheltered waters. Then I ordered my own crew to pull into the rocks just outside of the harbor, where I could conveniently send my men to shore to spy out the land. I sent 3 men to find out what they could. It was not long before 2 of them came running back to the ship with a terrible tale to tell. On the road to the town, they had met a young woman who told them that the land was called Laestrygonia, and that her father, Antiphates, was the king. She pointed out his palace, where they went in all innocence, to ask for shelter and provisions. Once inside the palace, they realized that they had made a horrible mistake. The Laestrygonians were giants, like the Cyclops, and just as savage. Antiphates seized one of my men and tore him apart. The other 2, my trusted cousins, Eurylochus and his friend Politius, just barely managed to escape. As they finished their story, hundreds of giant Laestrygonians appeared on the cliff overlooking the harbor and began hurling huge rocks down onto the ships below. My men struggled desperately to haul the anchors and to get their ships under the way, but they were too late. The entire fleet was smashed apart by the bombardment, and the survivors were spread like fish and cooked alive on the spits of the cruel giants. Because my own ship was moored outside of the harbor, we were able to slip away unnoticed and unharmed. But our escape was a joyless affair. We brooded over the loss of so many fine comrades, and shuddered at the memory of the unspeakable sights we had seen. After 2 more miserable days at sea, we reached land again and found a small natural harbor where we moored our ships and disembarked. Then we just lay on the beach for 2 days and nights, overcome with sorrow and exhaustion. At dawn on the third day, while my men still slept, I took my sword and my spear and ventured out of the camp. I made my way through the dense forest land until I came to a tall crag. I scrambled to the top and was able to see for miles in every direction. We had come to a beautiful island covered in forest and hills, with wide central plain. A turquoise river meandered across the plain, and as my eyes followed its sinuous path, I saw wisps of smoke floating up from a distant cluster of buildings that I imagined were a small village. My first instinct was to go and investigate, but some sixth sense held me back. I decided to return to camp, tell my men what I had seen, and lead an expedition across the plain. But my first task was to organize a hunting party. In our despair, we had not eaten for days. Not far from our camp, I came face to face with a majestic stag making its way down the river. In a dense forest, it was instantly cornered, and sensing that there was no time to escape, it lowered its great antlers and rushed straight at me. I was ready with my spear, which I had drove through the animal's heart. I managed to drag the carcass back to camp, and soon we were enjoying a delicious feast of roasted venison, washed down with fragrant wine from the hold of our ship. Now we began joking and laughing for the first time in days, and I told my men what I had seen from my vantage point on the crag. Their faces fell when I told them my plan. After what we had been through, their reluctance was understandable, but what was the alternative? We had no idea where we were, no idea which direction to take when we left the island, and no provisions except for wine. Of the 720 men under my command when we left Troy, only 45 remained. We split into two groups and drew sticks to see who would explore the island. My group was chosen to stay at the camp. At dawn the following day, the others, led by Eurylochius, my trusted cousin, set off through the trees with heavy hearts. We waited anxiously all day until evening, when Eurylochius came rushing out of the trees and collapsed at our feet. He was pale, trembling, and out of breath, and when at last he found his voice, his story filled us with gloom. "Odysseus, my lord, we went as you told us, through the forest and onto the plain. We made our way across it until we came to a magnificent palace. Outside the palace, lions and mountains of wolves roamed freely. To our amazement, instead of attacking us or running away, they approached us and fawned over us through the expected something from us. They were obviously drugged or enchanted, and the look in their eye was strangely human and inexpressibly sad. As we stood and stared at them, we heard a beautiful song coming from the palace. It was a woman's voice, and it sounded so wonderful that I immediately knew that it belonged to a goddess. We listened in wonder until the singing stopped. Then Polites yelled. Soon, the shining doors of the palace opened. There stood the goddess. She smiled at us enticingly and invited us in. Without a moment's hesitation, my companions entered. I alone remained outside. I don't know exactly why, but she made me uneasy. There were the lions and the wolves too. There was something about the look in their eyes that I couldn't get out of my mind. I sat on the ground with my back against a tree and considered what to do. I didn't have many choices. Rather than simply sit and wait for return to the camp alone, I decided to find out what was going on in the palace. I crept around the walls under the covers of the trees until I saw a magnificent balcony overlooking the river with steps leading up to it. I hurried up the steps, praying that I wouldn't be seen, and peered through the great windows and looked out over the balcony. I found myself looking into the main hall of the palace, where I could see my comrades with the goddess and her maids. At first everything appeared to be normal. They were laughing and talking as they ate and drank, and I began to think that I'd been an idiot not to go in with them. Before long, however, their eyes glazed over and they slumped drunkenly in their seats. The goddess then pulled out a wand and touched them one after the other. They ran around on all fours, grunting like pigs. Their faces began sprouting snouts and bristles. Together with her maids, the goddess drove them out of their sights beyond the palace wall. When she returned, I crept down to the sights to see what had happened. I found to my horror that our comrades had been turned into swine. Only their eyes remained human, and when I saw their desperate pleading look, I realized what it was about the lions and wolves that troubled me so. However, there was nothing I could do to help them, and I was terrified of being caught myself. I managed to slip away unnoticed and ran straight back here. When Eurylochius had finished, my men began weeping and groaning for their lost comrades. As for me, despair had turned to anger while I listened to the story. I was in no mood for tears. I leaped to my feet, grabbed my sword, and asked Eurylochius to lead me to the palace. He fell to his knees and begged me not to go. He was clearly too terrified to help, so I left the camp alone. I made my way through the forest across the plain, and as I approached the palace a beautiful young man appeared out of nowhere. His golden sandals and golden wand told me that he was Hermes, the son of Zeus and Maia, the messenger of the gods. "Unluckiest of men," he said, seizing hold of my hand, "I have come to help you, for without my help your enchantress Circe will turn you into a pig like the rest of your men, to wallow in her sties until you die." The god bent down and pulled a plant out of the ground. Its flower was milk white, and its root was black as night. "This is mole," Hermes said, holding out the plant to me. "Mole is a magic herb that will protect you from Circe's drugs and spells. When she strikes you with her wand, you must draw your sword and threaten to kill her. She will ask you to forgive her and offer you to make love to you. This you must accept, for no mortal shall refuse the bed of a goddess. However, first make her swear the divine oath that she will do no harm and that she will release your men. Otherwise she will have you at her mercy." Hermes flew up into the sky and disappeared as suddenly as he had come. Encouraged by his words and by his magic gift, I walked past the enchanted wolves and lions and the shining doors of Circe's palace. A lovely song came from within, but I shut my ears to it and beat loudly on the doors. Soon they opened and Circe appeared. She was even lovelier than I had imagined. "Noble strangers," she said in a voice of night and honey, "you are welcome to Circe's house." And then she took me by the hand and led me into the great hall. I looked around nervously, sensing the danger I was in. The hall was full of beautiful cloths that Circe had woven, in patterns and intricate and delicate as a spider's web. As the goddess mixed my wine with her stupefying potions, I had an unpleasant sensation that I was a juicy fly she had just enticed into her web. "Noble stranger, please try this," said Circe, softly handing me a golden cup. "I think you'll like it," she smiled as I drank, trusting the mole to protect me. Immediately Circe was upon me with her wand. "There, stupid man, become a pig you really are. I'll drive you to my sties, where you can root around in the dirt with the others." I drew my sword before she had finished speaking. Now I held it to her throat. Circe shrieked, fell to the ground, and clasped her arms around my knees. "Noble stranger, forgive me. I thought you were another wretched man begging at my doorstep. Now I see that I was wrong to despise you." She lifted her head and gazed imploringly at me. "No man has ever resisted my drugs and spells before. You must be Odysseus himself, for Hermes has always warned me that you would come. Now that you're here, let me welcome you as only a great hero deserves. Put away your bright sword and come to my bed, where I'll make you forget your sorrow and your suffering." "Lovely Circe," I replied coldly, without lowering my sword, "how can you expect me to trust you? First you try to drug me and cast your vile spells. Now you offer to love me. Meanwhile my dear companions grunt helplessly in your sties. Only the gods know how miserable souls wandered this island, trapped in the alien bodies of lions and wolves. Once you have me in your bed, naked without my sword, what's to stop you from bewitching me too? Now, first, you must swear on divine oath to free my men and do nothing more to harm us." Circe swore to the oath and led me out of the sties and told me to fling open the doors. As the swine came running out by one, she touched them with her wand. At once they changed back into the shape of my comrades. They looked lost and shaken, but they were younger and more handsome than I remembered. It took them a few moments to recover, but when they saw me standing next to Circe, they were overjoyed and wept as I embraced them. Even Circe was affected.